Welcome everyone. We'll get started here with our DataWorks Salon. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about data management plans for NIH grants and how you can learn some of the best practices, understand the policy itself. We also have some learnings from the first year of implementation of that policy that Valerie Cotton from NICHD will be sharing with us. And then we have some resources to share on how to create your data management plan with some guidance and free resources that can help you as you're building your plan. So my name's Emily. I'm the community manager for the DataWorks program. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction so that and then turn it over to our panelists. FASEB DataWorks is an initiative that's here to support you. FASEB as an organization is a federation of 25 societies representing over 100,000 scientists in the biological and biomedical research field. DataWorks is a program that's bringing the community together to advance human health through data sharing and reuse. So main goals are to link researchers to services and expertise and to bring people together to improve the ecosystem of data management in the biosciences. So you're in one of our 3 programs, DataWorks Salon. We also run a prize program to recognize and reward research practices that integrate data sharing and reuse and advance human health. And we also have a help desk to support you with data management in your research that my colleague Stephanie will be talking about later in the program. So DataWorks is a program to support researchers like you, and we hope that through this salon and our other resources, you're able to learn more about data sharing and reuse and integrate it into your work. And we're here to support you along the way. Without further ado, we'll jump into our panelists. We have 3 panelists today to talk about data management plans and best practices. Our first panelist is Lena Bohman from Hofstra University, who will talk about the data management policy from the NIH, what you can do to understand the requirements of that policy, and some of the key considerations while you're building a data management plan. We'll be followed by Valerie Cotton from NIH, who will speak about the learnings from the first year of implementing this plan and some of the things that you can do to avoid the common mistakes and integrate what we've seen from the first year of implementation into your research data management plan. And then last, we have Stephanie Hagstrom from the DataWorks program, who will talk about our help desk and how we can support you with step-by-step guidance as you build your plan. So I'll turn it over to Lena, who will talk to us about the data management policy and what you can expect and what the requirements are as you build a plan for your research project.
Okay, let me get my screen sharing set up here. Okay, please let me know if it's not working.
Looks good.
Okay, good. So, and also thanks for attending this presentation. My name is Lena Bohman, and I'm the Senior Data Services and Research Impact Librarian for the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra and Northwell Health. In this presentation, which will last about 15 minutes, I will go over the policy requirements, the main points of how to write a data management and sharing plan for an NIH grant, and the process of choosing a repository to share your data, as well as a quick touch on budgeting guidelines under the policy. So to start off, what is different about this new policy? New meaning a year old now, but still relatively new. Previously, the NIH required short resource sharing plans for grants over $500,000. Now, resource sharing plans have been renamed to data management and sharing plans, and they are required for all grant applications and competitive renewals. The format of the data management and sharing plan is also different than the resource sharing plans. And in addition, scientific data are now expected to be shared by default unless a justifiable reason can be provided to not share the data. Finally, the NIH has allowed for costs associated with data management to be written into the grant budget, such as repository fees. So excluded from the NIH data management and sharing policy are certain grant classifications that do not generate scientific data or are not research projects. This means most professional development related grants are excluded from the policy. The NIH has released a complete list of grant classifications included in the policy, which is available for download at their sharing.nih.gov site. Importantly, the NIH is only requiring that scientific data, according to their definition, be shared. According to the NIH's definition, scientific data is defined as data commonly accepted in the scientific community as of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings, regardless of whether the data are used to support scholarly publications. Scientific data includes any data needed to validate and replicate the research findings. This excludes all of the categories of data on this slide. For those of you who generate a lot of data in your research, the exclusions are particularly important to consider when curating your data set for sharing, since not everything needs to be or is expected to be shared. Think about what raw data would be needed for an independent researcher in your field to replicate your published analyses when curating your data to be shared. Finally, the NIH does not expect you to reshare data that has already been shared. If your work analyzes data sets that are already publicly available, you can include the information about where to find them in your data availability statement with your published article rather than sharing them again. Besides data excluded from the policy, the NIH has also listed some justifiable limitations on sharing, including an existing consent that limits sharing, privacy or safety concerns for participants that cannot be mitigated, a legal policy that prohibits sharing, and restrictions imposed by data use agreements or contracts. If you believe your data falls under one of these limitations on sharing, you still must submit a data management and sharing plan, and in the plan, you explain your reasoning for not sharing. While the NIH has recognized various exceptions to data sharing in the new policies, researchers are still expected to maximize ethical data sharing. The NIH does not consider the size of the data set or the small scope of the data set to be appropriate reasons for not sharing data. Another aspect of the policy is the question of timing. Data must be shared when findings from a grant are published or as a final drop dead date at the end of the award period. The NIH has indicated that no-cost extensions may be used to extend this period. If, for example, you need extra time at the end of your award to prepare your manuscript before sharing data, you can apply for a no-cost extension to extend the deadline for data sharing. So now we will move on to writing the data management and sharing plan that is required under the new policy. It is important to note that the data management and sharing plan is not a form that represents your agreement to share data. Rather, it is meant to be a critical thinking exercise where you plan how you will manage data over the life cycle of your grant. For most cases, this will include data sharing, but the data management and sharing plan is also an opportunity to explain whatever limitations you have on sharing your data to the NIH staff. Another important note is that separate genomic data sharing plans are no longer required. they will be rolled into the new data management and sharing plan. In the data management and sharing plan, the 6 required elements are data type, related tools, software and code, standards, data preservation, access and timelines, access, distribution, and reuse considerations, and oversight of data management and sharing. These 6 elements are explicated further in the DataWorks help desk articles, which Stephanie will talk about at the end. So the data management and sharing plan is expected to be 2 pages or less. However, that's not a firm requirement, and some complicated projects may take more. The NIH has released a template for researchers, which is on this slide. The template helps guide you through the 6 elements. You may also want to use the DMP tool, a free online web tool, which guides you through the process of writing a DMP and which has a template for the NIH DMS policy. The DMP tool template includes more information like example answers and guidance. However, you are not required to use any particular template. So now I'm going to move into the section of the presentation discussing data repositories. You will probably need to select a repository to share your data as part of the data management and sharing process. I'm going to start by defining a data repository and discussing the difference between a data repository and data storage. The term data storage generally refers to space used for internal storage. Data in data storage is only subject to the internal standards of your team or lab or institution. Data storage can be long or short term, and it's usually used to hold everything generated in the research process without any curation. Data repositories, on the other hand, are for sharing data with the broader scientific community. Before sharing your data, you will go through a process known as data curation, where you select the data to share and make it accessible and reusable to those outside your direct research team. For example, you might create a documentation or a data dictionary. Data shared in a data repository is also subject to the standards created by the stewards of that repository, who, for example, might mandate the use of a particular metadata scheme. This flowchart covers the workflow of choosing a repository under the data management and sharing policy. The first thing to check is if your ICO or FOA identify a repository. If so, you will use that repository. If there is no designated repository, the next step is to look for a discipline or domain-specific repository. If you cannot find a discipline or domain-specific repository, you have the option of uploading small data sets to PubMed Central with your publication, or using a generalist repository for larger data sets. There are some generalist repositories that are endorsed by the NIH, which you can find on their website. Another factor to consider when you're choosing a repository is if you need a repository with controlled access. A controlled access repository includes some form of check on who can access the shared data. For instance, they may require a data use agreement or a submitted research plan. You may wish to consider controlled access with data that have limitations on sharing, or data that may pose a risk to participants or groups, or finally, data that cannot be sufficiently de-identified. So finally, just a brief discussion of budgeting for data management and sharing under the policy. Under the new policy, the NIH is allowing for certain costs associated with data management and sharing to be written into the grant. This includes costs associated with data curation, preservation, sharing, or local data management. For example, you could write into your grant cost for an outside vendor to help with de-identification, or if you have any fees required by your repository. Not allowed are infrastructure costs or costs associated with the routine conduct of research. So thanks for listening to my quick overview of the NIH data management and sharing policy, and I will be happy to take questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Lena. What a nice overview of the policy and its requirements. Now we'll turn to Valerie Cotton, who is the NICHD Deputy Director of Data Science and Sharing. I hope I got that correct. And
Got it.
she'll be talking about learnings from the first year of implementation and what we can do as researchers as we're preparing to integrate those learnings into our process.
Awesome. Am I sharing the correct screen?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay. Always want to make sure. Thanks so much, Lena and Emily, for that kickoff. That's really a good foundation. As Emily said, I'm Valerie Cotton. I'm from one of the 27 institutes at the NIH, here to share with you, and my institute is the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. I'm going to share some more tips for writing a data management sharing plan, but these are all based on our analysis and observations from the first year of implementation. And even though I'm here representing NICHD, the approach we took is based on how the NIH data management sharing policy is written. And we're finding that the themes we found are pretty consistent across NIH. At NICHD, we care pretty deeply about data sharing. We're committed to promoting data sharing to accelerate scientific progress that improves the lives of pregnant people, children, and people with disabilities. But of course, it's important to the overall NIH mission as well. In 2020, the NICHD strategic plan created my office to build an ecosystem that fosters responsible and innovative use of our data. And so that's why we care about the data management sharing policy. Is really foundational to that vision and strategy. This is just to summarize how over the last year, we engaged the NICHD Data Sharing Committee, which is an internal committee made up of program officers from across the Institute and representatives from my office. And this was basically a year-long exercise to identify the key issues that we kept seeing in data management sharing plans, how to interpret the policy to assess those issues, and ultimately determine what is acceptable or not. So we took all those learnings to train all of our program officers to look for the issues I'm going to talk about today. And then we also have created some public materials that reflect those findings as well. Emily thought it would be helpful for me to sort of talk about the life cycle of a data management sharing plan. So you know what the vortex looks like once it comes to NIH. So as you all know, the plans are now attachments to a new section called Other Plans, which is different from the Resource Sharing Plan section. And to go along with the plan, applicants must include a summary of the plan and data management sharing costs in the budget justification. In general, peer reviewers will not even be able to see the data management sharing plan, but they can see the data management sharing costs. That's part of the budget because this is part of their normal review of whether costs are justified and reasonable. It's actually the program officer who's responsible for assessing data management sharing plans. And they need to do this before the award is made during that just-in-time process. If a data management sharing plan is not acceptable, according to the expectations of the policy, the program officer, in collaboration with the grants management specialist, will contact the PI and institution to request a revision. And so an award cannot be made until the PO determines that the plan is acceptable. And the plan actually becomes a term and condition of the notice of award. So that is the enforcement mechanism for compliance. If you do need to revise your plan after the award is made, you can do that, but you need program officer approval. Examples of significant changes that will require that PO approval include changing the scientific direction. So your data is going to look different, using a different repository, and revising your timeline. Progress with your plan will be monitored at the RPPR stage. So for those of you who have grants already, you know that you have some questions you have to answer. At roughly the year mark, you will start getting questions about have you made progress on your data management and sharing plans. And compliance with the plan will factor into future funding decisions. This is a summary of the key issues we keep seeing. We're seeing things like contradictory information provided across the plan elements, a lot of vague reasons for not sharing. Many plans indicate only sharing in the form of publications or presentations at conferences, which is sort of what we call the old school method, and not really keeping with these new expectations. And we identified a variety of issues related to which data are shared, when it's shared, which has to be both complying with the data management sharing policy, as well as the NIH genomic data sharing policy, which is still at play, but is part of the data management sharing plan, where the data is shared and how it's shared. We also found that the data management and sharing budget justifications are often missing or they're not clear. And I'm going to go over most of these issues in the next slides in the form of tips for writing a data management and sharing plan. So here are the overall tips that we came up with. Overall, remember that the data management and sharing are inherent to the research process. Good data management and sharing is critical to good research. Remember that the goal of data sharing is to accelerate scientific progress. This is the reason why we're doing this. It's not just a bureaucratic exercise. So when you think about sharing, your plan should really support that goal. When in doubt, refer to the definitions that Lena talked about in the policy materials, because we're relying on those to determine whether or not a plan is acceptable. And just to emphasize, in that definition of data sharing, we're looking for making that data accessible to the public or larger research community. And in the definition of scientific data, we're focused on the fact that it's tied to principles of quality and reuse, regardless of publication. It's important to be clear about which data, when, where, and how, not only for NIH's sake, but also for the public to understand your plan, because the intent is eventually to make these plans public. And it's also so that you know exactly what you need to do to implement your plan, as Lena explained. Finally, for anything that deviates from what is expected in the policy, justify it. So again, think of the guidance in the policy as the default. Think of it as do this unless you have a reason not to. And you must articulate what those reasons are so that NIH can then review those and determine whether the justifications are acceptable or not. When describing which data will be generated and shared, include details like species, formats, and amount. We've had a lot of issues where there are some plans that we couldn't tell if the data was coming from a mouse or a human or a fish. But all of this information really matters so that the program officer can consider whether other aspects of the plan are appropriate, like should there be privacy protections? If it came from a human, there should be. Is this the right repository? Are there special software that are needed to access these files? And even to determine whether the NIH genomic data sharing policy applies, and that has specific timeline and format expectations. It's important to clarify details associated with each data type that you're generating. Sometimes it was hard for us to tell which data will be shared out of all the data that you'll generate, or which standards apply to each data type. A lot of plans are still saying they will only share publication-related data, but again, the policy expects sharing data not associated with publications. So provide all the same details that you would for non-publication associated scientific data as you would for non-publication associated data. And Lena emphasized this too. This has been built into the policy from day one with that definition of scientific data, but it's being further emphasized by the White House's call to ensure free, immediate, and equitable access to federally funded research. Repositories are really important. Identifying to and committing to a data repository will actually help you prepare the rest of your plan and manage the data throughout the life of the project. Once you know which data repository you're going to use, you can start preparing the documentation, the metadata, the formats, and you can plan your de-identification strategy according to the repository's guidelines as soon as your data collection begins. If something comes up, remember, and you have to change which repository you're using, you can do that with that program officer approval. So don't worry. Make sure your data, you're using data repositories that make data accessible to the public or the larger research community, and not just a limited group of investigators. For example, we're still seeing some plans that are using a system that only supports sharing within a consortium or within an institution, but that's not making the data accessible to the broad research community, so it's not meeting that definition of data sharing. Sharing data in journals is not the same as sharing data in a repository, and is generally not sufficient for making that data accessible and useful, findable, and all that to the research community. The policy guidance emphasizes, and Lena pointed this out too, but I want to say it again, that your NOFO or your FOA might tell you which repository to use. And then your next stop is to look at domain or data type specific data repositories. These are always preferred over generalist repositories. We're sort of seeing some researchers over rely on generalist repositories since their whole point is that they take any data type. But domain-specific repositories are really important because they often specialize in curation services for their specific data types and repository features designed to specifically meet the needs of the research communities they serve. Generalist repositories are great, and they should be used, but only if there's not an appropriate domain or data type specific data repository available. The biggest issue that we are seeing in plans are the plans that state they will share data by request. So this means that a researcher would have to contact the PI to get access to the data. And this is if you're keeping your data locally or even if you're using a repository, but you're still saying researchers have to call you. Not only is there a growing body of literature demonstrating that this approach is not effective, just think about it. Having one person or a small team serve as a gatekeeper inhibits the ability to make the data accessible to the larger research community. So again, not quite aligned to that definition of sharing. And we realized that there might actually be some confusion in the community about the definition of controlled access here. There's a difference between by request and an investigator controlling access and a repository controlling access as a privacy protection described in the policy materials. So when you're concerned about privacy, you should be thinking about things like de-identification and using a controlled access data repository. But this is where it's the repository that has established processes for verifying appropriate use of the data, including things like a centralized data use agreement. So investigators contributing the data to the repository don't have to manage or create those processes on their own. So you don't have to form your own data use agreement with the end users. The repository takes care of that for you. For any approach that deviates from what the policy expects, provide a justification. This is a really big pain point. We're seeing a lot of really vague justifications that don't actually really articulate what the issue is. So tell us why it's not possible or reasonable to share certain data or to share data by the end of the award period. And we haven't seen a good reason for not using a data repository, but if you think you have one, you should state it. Again, for the program officer to determine whether that's appropriate. When you are citing laws, regulations, or policies as a reason to limit data sharing, cite the specific law or the specific policy. And in some cases, you may have to invoke a very specific protection because some of these rules mean that you can delay data sharing, but you don't necessarily have to. So if you choose to, you really have to intentionally state the law and invoke the protection that you're using. When citing human subjects reasons as a reason to limit data sharing, explain your IRB's role in that determination, right? They're the experts here. They should be guiding you in that appropriateness based on consent and other factors. And that helps us understand that it's not just you making the decision, the IRB was part of that conversation as well. Like I said, we've had a lot of vague and missing data management and sharing budget justification. So program officers are looking for a little paragraph that summarizes the plan and describes the data management sharing costs associated with it. You should be providing this even if you're claiming that your data management and sharing costs are zero. And what the program officers at NICHD care about is they actually want to make sure that you're requesting enough money, that you're requesting sufficient funds to support the data management and sharing activities that you described in your plan throughout the life of the project and not just at the very end. Again, data management sharing begins from data collection. This is why we're asking for your plan and your grant application. So you should make sure you're ready for that. We suggest that you give a lot of thought in the time and effort that staff and personnel will commit to preparing data for submission to data repositories. This is where we expect to see most of the data management and sharing costs going. Because cleaning, curating, formatting, de-identifying, preparing the data documentation for that data repository submission, that all takes time. And it's really the place where we expect to see the most costs. Maybe you don't need as much support if you have the help of a librarian like Lena, or you're working with the data coordinating center. But it would actually be helpful for you to tell us that so we understand why your costs look so low for data management and sharing. We're also learning that it's actually more expensive for researchers to share data by hosting on their own servers or websites rather than using an established data repository. So this is yet another reason to use a data repository since the costs shift from you, the researcher, to the repository. And this is especially true because honestly, most data repositories in the NIH ecosystem do not charge data submission fees. Some of them do, but they're usually a minimal one-time fee upfront, so you don't have to worry about those recurring costs to maintain the data throughout the life of it being shared. And it's then the repository that will maintain that. Finally, we have created NICHD, like I said, we don't have our own version of the data management and sharing policy, but we have created some resources to respond to the specific needs and questions of our research community. We have a pretty broad portfolio, so I would say these are pretty applicable to everyone. And I'll share the link to our website where these are available. Okay, and I will hand it back to Emily.
Yes, thank you. What great learnings about some of the things that we can keep in mind as we're writing plans. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague Stephanie, who is our help desk manager, and she'll talk through some resources that can help you as you're writing your plan with step-by-step guidance and a wealth of information specifically curated for biosciences. Stephanie, you're on mute.
And I lost the video. It's one of those.
There we go.
Yeah. Hi, I'm on one of those dual screens, and then the Zoom goes off to the other side. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Valerie. This was all great. I really appreciate being here. Like Emily said, my name's Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm part of the FASEB team, and I'm on the DataWorks initiative, and I'm the program manager for a help desk, our help desk. And I'm thrilled to show you our latest version of the help desk. Some of you may have seen our version 1. This is version 2. And we now have it on a platform where we can have questions and answers, and we have guides. So what I wanted to show you today was what we did was we met with some researchers over the last half of a year, and we heard over and over again, we just need how-to guides, like simply, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you find a repository? What are best practices? What are things that are happening? And so we listened to that and we put that together. So what you're going to see today, and I'm going to show you, is that we have basically how-to guides, and I will show you the ones that we put together for how to write a data management plan. Currently, we have 9 categories. This is fairly new. So we have 9 categories and 30 guides. And for the data management plan for NIH, we have 11 guides for that category. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to find us first. Let me open this up. First of all, if you go to FASEB.org, you can go to the menu, go to data management, and I'm going to be doing a live demo. So you would hit the help desk here. And Emily will also put into the chat the direct to the desk. So this is the landing page where you land when you navigate to this page. And what the help desk is, it's, as I mentioned, was how-to guides, and we're specifically for the biological and biomedical research community. And it's to support data management and reuse and sharing. So we have a landing page, and we feature some of our other features of DataWorks, like our Salon. We're featuring the Fair Data podcast here. We'll be putting different versions of that. And then down here are other DataWorks initiatives, our Salon and our prize, which was mentioned earlier. And then most important, down here in this little corner is a newsletter sign up. So if you want, Emily will put the link in the chat for that. We'd love it if you would sign up, and then every time we have a new guide come out, we'll announce it and you'll get that information. So let's just roll on over to the guide now. Okay, so you just click here, and our knowledge base looks something like this. So what it is there's categories, as I mentioned, and each one of the categories has multiple guides. So for the NIH Data Management Sharing Plan, there's 11 guides, and it walks you through each and every element that's required for submitting a data management and sharing plan. So what you'll see here, each one of these are specific guides on how to do those sections of the plan. So each one of our guides looks very similar. So each one, there'll be element 1, element 2, element 3. And in those guides, what you'll see would be, hang on one second, I'm just trying to get to my, you'll see NIH requirement and what NIH requires. We'll give a little description of what that is. We'll give example text. So of what you would include in your data management plan. We'll have a fill in the blank template for you to use for your data. And we have NIH guidance and requirements listed in here, plus tips and additional resources where you can go. And so what I'll do is I will give you a little example of, let's see, let's look at data standards. And here's an example of what a guide looks like. So this one's on the element 3 data standards, and we give little tips. We'll give the requirements, examples, fill in the blank, NIH guidance, and it looks like this. And every guide looks like this for the elements. So it's requirement, what that means, any tips that come along with that. Here's some examples of data standards. Here's an example of text that's in a plan. Here's a fill in the blank. Here's the guidance from NIH. Here's a link to the DMP tool that Valerie mentioned, and I think also Lena mentioned, and then the guidance, additional resources, and related articles. So every single one of the elements guides has one of these written guides. The second is data repositories, and Valerie talked about this, and this would be also for NIH. And we go through what's a repository, why choose one, the different types of repositories. Valerie mentioned different generalist data repositories, specialist data repositories, institutional repositories, and so on. So it'll give you help for what you're looking for. In addition to that, which I think is very helpful, is down here, there are finding data repositories. So there's different links to different repository finders where you might look there, put in keywords and find a repository, a specialist repository for your type of data. And then down here are key characteristics to consider when selecting a repository. And it's a long list, but I think it's important before you go selecting a repository, because like Valerie said, the repository is a really important part of putting in your data sharing plan. And then here's some additional considerations for human data. We also have a guide for budgeting. And the guide for budgeting has allowable costs, tips that you might consider, unallowable costs, the application process, and so on. So all of these guides are step-by-step what you need to do. And then at the bottom of each one, we always have additional resources for you to go look for that, including where we got this, the source of the information that we got. In addition to that, we have a plans example, DMS plans, and I will give a caveat. None of these, this was before the first round of grants. So caution using them, but there are sample plans throughout this that the NIH provided. And you could go look and see if there's anything that relates to the type of data that you're going to be submitting on your plan. And then the last guide that's related to the data management sharing plan for NIH is the DMP tool. And it's an actual guide on how to use that tool. So that's it for the data management planning part of this. But I wanted to also go through a little bit about, let's see, I'm looking over here. I'm sorry. Got some. We have 5 new categories now that have been recently added to this desk, and I'll go through that quickly because it's not specifically to the NIH data submission or grant submission plan, but it's general data management topics, and we're adding more and more to that. In fact, Lena is our writer, so a lot of these guides you will see coming are written by Lena. Discovering data sets under data discovery and understanding data use, DUAs. Managing research, we have 5 guides in there so far. We have a guide on a category on persistent identifiers, and there's 5 guides in there so far, and there'll be more. we have one on publishing and one on miscellaneous. So that's what we have in the knowledge base currently. And like I mentioned, we are adding to it weekly. So once you get here, you can search for, there's several ways to find information. And one is to just simply put in, like say, you just want to find out about budgets. So put in budget, and up the articles will come that have the word budget in it. And that's the simplest way. Or, and this is the latest feature that we have just added to our desk, is live help. And down here, you click here, you'll see I was using this example. The bot says, tell me about what you need. I said, I'm looking for PIDs. It came back and showed some of the articles on PIDs. I said, it said, do you need more help? I said, yes, I do. And it said, please tell us, give us your email. And then the next question would be, what do you need? And we have a group of subject matter experts lined up to answer these questions. So if you have questions and we can't answer in our guides, in our knowledge base, then you can ask questions from the bot. Yep. And let's see. I think that's all I had for this. And I just want to put this up here. So you have the login for it. So that's it. That's all I have, Em.
Okay, yeah, these are some great resources. And as Stephanie mentioned, they're free and available for you to use right now, or share with your colleagues who are writing plans. For the remainder of the time, for about 10 to 12 minutes, we'll be having Q&A. I know there's some questions that have come through the chat already. Please feel free to put your question in the Zoom chat, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and ask your question on audio or video as you like. We'll start with the first question we got, which was from Andrea Lynch, related to budgets. Valerie, would you like to talk through? The question was that some PI budgets were at the funding total limit for funding before they updated the policy, and therefore put $1 associated with data management and sharing costs, and what might be in consideration related to changes regarding the funding total limit to support flexibility and DMS activities.
Yeah, I can take that. Let me start by answering that. Answering the explicit question is above my pay grade. I cannot comment on whether the total budget caps will be changed. NIH in general is at the behest of many things such as Congress and regulations to make that kind of decision. But let me clarify a few things about how the policy is structured. And there was actually a change in the budget guidance in October. So the first draft of the policy said that you should create a separate budget line item in your budget called data management and sharing costs. So it's a new category, it's separate from personnel, put this in your line item. That has gone away. So as of October, the new guidance reverts back to the original budget categories. So what this means is that your data management and sharing costs exist in the other budget categories. What the instructions in the budget justification are asking for is for you to summarize where data management and sharing overlaps with the costs that you already budgeted for. And this is actually an important principle, right? Because, like we said, data management sharing is actually an inherent part of the research process. So for example, you already have postdocs, research assistants, other staff who are already working with the data, collecting the data, managing the data. And presumably part of their activities will include getting that data ready for submission to a data repository. So you've already budgeted for that person to exist in your grant. And then in the data management sharing justification, we want you to summarize for us that the data management and sharing activities will be covered by that person or those people. So it's a slightly different framework than the original publication of the policy. We want, but program, again, we just want to see that you have somebody involved. And the biggest example is actually, it gets back to the plan itself. There's an element that says who's going to be responsible for the data sharing. And, if you say something like a postdoc, you should go back into your budget and say, the personnel that I've already budgeted for is the person who's going to be, handling the brunt of the data management and sharing costs. So I hope that context helps.
Great. Yeah, it's always something to figure out. I think we have a next question, which was related to finding a repository for confocal microscopy. And I think Lena has some thoughts there. And then also Stephanie mentioned that the help desk can provide you some more guidance as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Valerie also has thoughts on this, but yeah, some imaging data, with the exception of like Sun Young put in import, which is for immunology, and there's a very robust ecosystem for brain imaging data. But yeah, especially some imaging data, like there isn't a great subject-specific repository, and that's something you're gonna have to start looking at a generalist repository. I would also suggest that you might want to think about if how much of the imaging data itself is necessary to deposit. For example, if you quantify the data off of the images in some way, you may be able to deposit that instead of the images, because images take up a lot of room. And so that can be, especially when you're looking at a generalist repository, cost prohibitive, and also prohibitive for the people you might share it with, because if you have 10 terabytes of images, they have to have a way to process that, and many people don't. So yeah, those are some things I would start thinking about. And also, if you're in an institution that has a data librarian, that's like finding the right repository is a really common question for us to get. So please reach out to them.
Yeah, I really just want to echo how much Lena said, kind of what I was going to say, but let me sort of repeat some of the key points. Because when I get a question like this, I always start, there's a question that none of us can answer, that the researcher has to think through. And it's which data counts as the scientific data, which data meets that threshold of being necessary to enable replication and use and future discoveries. Because in some cases, the extremely raw imaging files are not necessary and are in fact possibly not useful for reproducing or making good use of the data for more research. So sometimes it turns out these interim files, spreadsheets, end up being more useful and the thing you should focus on for sharing scientific data. Now I can't answer that without more context, but it's something to think through. I'm so glad somebody mentioned import, but import is for immunological data. So also brain, Lena, like exactly, those are two research areas that have very specific repositories that are very good at accepting these kinds of data. Now, if you don't fall into those domains, you might be looking at a generalist repository, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love to see both our panelists and the community members having a conversation about what are some of the most complex questions, which is what will fit best for each research project. Yeah, I wonder if there's more questions from the community.
I think Danica had one for Stephanie.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
About if the help desk content will be licensed for reuse.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I should take that back, but I can't imagine why it wouldn't be. I just have to talk with the advisory committee on that. But we're sharing open data all the time. I mean, that's kind of our policy. So I'll get back to you on that, Danica. Anything else?
Yeah, I wonder if there's any more questions from the community. I know we've covered a lot of material here, and that there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about how to take this policy and kind of fit it to the research project that you're submitting a proposal for. So happy to take more questions here. Oh, okay. We have a question related to
An
planning
approved
to
plan.
share approved data management plans. Valerie, I wonder if you have thoughts on this, and I also know that the NIH itself is much broader than.
Whose comment is it? Let me see.
Sun Young Kim's question related to approved data management and sharing plans.
Does NIH have any plans to share approved DMS?
Okay, yeah. So the answer is the policy was written telling you all that we reserve the right to publish them all. And I think that we're still we're still, talking about when the right time is to do that. Because there's definitely a learning curve. I think we're all still learning together. It required getting the plans from you all to figure out what the issues were. And we're sort of still iterating on, asking for those revisions and getting plans into better shape. So I think the time is coming. I don't think that time is right now.
If you sign up on the newsletter, we'll make sure we let you know as soon as it happens.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so there's a question related to FTP pilot templates. Valerie.
Yeah, I can take that. So, for those of you who might not be aware, maybe this was discussed lightly, but I am a participant in the FDP pilot. So we're trying out some templates with the community right now. And in addition to the original one published, we have these more structured approaches to try to get the answers out of you all, your plans out of you. I think it's mostly been like a bandwidth issue to create example plans out of those. We actually had done it. We just haven't gotten around to publish it. So I can take it back to my team to see if we could share example plans that use the other two templates. But really right now, we're just hungry to get researchers trying out the templates and getting them to come in. I haven't seen that many come in yet. We're about to do a portfolio analysis to find them all. So the more you guys can use them and try them for real, we can capture that and promulgate that back out as example plans as well. But they're so much more structured. It's almost like you don't need an example because it tells you exactly what you need in each element. But that's good feedback. I'll take that back.
There's so much learning that can come from those samples or awarded plans. So exciting to see all parts of the community growing and evolving as the policy is implemented. Yeah, seeing the examples is helpful here. So we have about 2 more minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap things up for today's conversation. Thank you to Danica for sharing another resource here. And there, as Valerie mentioned, there's a number of sample plans that the NIH has published, as well as many other resources for you to find starting points, including some on help desk.
And I will say we will be adding this information to the help desk as we go.
Yeah. Okay. We'll pause one more second for questions here and then do a short outro for us as we wrap up today's event. Thank you everyone for joining. Okay. All right, so we have our next salon on February 14th, where we'll be talking about data curation best practices and some of the reasons why we can't publish your data set. This salon will be in partnership with Dryad, who is part of the NIH Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, and some real learnings from data curators and data producers on what you can do to smooth out the process of publishing your data set to a repository. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined for today's salon. We've recorded this salon, and it will be available on our YouTube channel, as well as be sent out in our newsletter as a recording for you to view and share with your colleagues. Thank you to everyone, and especially our panelists, for today's conversation.